Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so today we're really stepping into a complex space. We're going to be talking about the global sex industry,
Mm.
but not just, policy papers and abstract ideas. We want to get into the lived experiences, the
Mhm.
psychology of it all, agency, stigma, survival, what it actually means day to day to commodify intimacy.
Exactly. And I think that idea of the transactional calculus is so key right from the start
Yeah.
because you have this massive clash, right? Public perception is often just pure judgment, black and white. But then you look at the reality for so many people involved and economically, this work can be the most flexible, sometimes even the most supportive option they have. It's a buffer.
Yeah, it's often presented as, inherently worse than a square job, but the reality can be
Yeah.
different, more manageable, maybe.
Sometimes, yeah, much more. We saw that come up clearly in the research from New Zealand where it's decriminalized. There was one worker, Bella, who specifically mentioned the flexibility being able to control her own hours, choose clients. That autonomy allowed her to manage a serious mental health condition in a way that standard employment just wouldn't allow.
Yeah, that's huge. That kind of control is not just about money, is it? It's about managing your own life, your own well-being.
Precisely. It's about having some agency over your physical and psychological needs, which is often impossible in low-wage, inflexible jobs.
Okay, so let's really unpack that economic engine first, because it seems like more than anything else, financial necessity is the main driver here globally.
Oh, absolutely. When you look at many developing nations, the economic pressures are just immense. We're talking about poverty levels where this isn't really a choice in the way we might normally think of it. It's survival, pure and simple. And it's not just about surviving yourself, it's about supporting entire families, sometimes large extended families.
Right, and you see this especially starkly in places where other economic systems, maybe like mainstream tourism, haven't really benefited the local people directly, like the coastal region of Kenya, Mombasa was mentioned, huge international tourism, right?
Massive. But where does the money go? Mostly upstream. Government, foreign investors, maybe some local elites. It doesn't trickle down effectively. So you end up with this really unequal distribution of wealth.
And the stats there are just sobering.
Yeah.
50% of Mombasa residents below the poverty line.
Exactly. So things like sex tourism or romance tourism, as it's sometimes called, they don't arise out of nowhere. They're a direct market response to that economic fragility. And the dependency figures are astonishing. One study found 89% of coastal sex workers were supporting someone else.
89%?
Yeah. And almost half, 45%, were supporting at least three other people.
Wow. And for many, this is it, their only income source.
For two-thirds of them in that study, yeah. 66%. It was their only way to make money. So when you hear that, the whole conversation about lifestyle choice just kind of evaporates, doesn't it? It's a basic economic need, keeping roofs over heads, food on table.
It really reframes the entire thing. And even in, say, Western countries where maybe absolute poverty isn't the immediate driver, it's still often about, like, a financial fast track, right? A specific goal.
Absolutely. It's often seen as a temporary means to a very specific end, not a lifelong career aspiration. There was a quote from Sophie, a worker who'd moved to New Zealand, that really captured this. She said, basically, I was just sick of not having money. I want to travel and I want to be able to save and not have this move be like a giant backward step.
So it's about agency, saving, getting ahead, avoiding feeling like you're falling behind financially.
Exactly. It's leveraging the market for a specific, often short-term financial goal.
Which makes it sound much less like some ancient trope and more like, well, like intense, high-stakes gig work almost, goal-oriented.
That's a really good way to put it. And that perspective is crucial when we look at the actual work involved, especially in something like the adult film industry. Any romantic ideas about that just disappear when you see the professional grind?
Yeah, the details on, like, a typical shoot day were pretty eye-opening. A 10-hour day, potentially.
Easily. And the actual sex is just one part of it. You've got, what, an hour and a half just for hair and makeup? Mandatory.
Right, which isn't just vanity. It's about brand consistency, looking the same across different shoots, different studios, professionalism.
Totally. And then there are the solo still shoots before the scene even starts, for marketing, box covers, thumbnails, all that stuff.
And that's just the onset part. The hidden workload seems massive.
Oh, it's huge. Most performers are essentially running a small business. They're their own brand manager, marketing department, customer service rep, constantly managing social media, Twitter, blogs, message boards, handling emails directly.
That email stat was wild, over 100 emails a day, just to keep the loyal fan base engaged and paying.
Yeah, that's basically a full-time comms job right there on top of everything else. You're the product, the CEO, the marketing team. It takes incredible organization and stamina.
And financially, most are freelancers.
Yeah.
Independent contractors.
Almost all of them, unless you're talking about the absolute top tier, like celebrity level performers who might have exclusive studio contracts. Pay varies wildly.
Yeah.
Maybe $900 up to $2,500 for a scene, which could be 6 hours of work.
Okay.
But often the more consistent or even higher income comes from their independent work. Setting their own rates for video chats, cam shows. We saw figures like $7 a minute for video chat or potentially making $900 just from tips in a 2-hour cam show.
Right. When you see those numbers
Yeah.
and the sheer effort involved, that whole exit plan thing makes perfect sense. It becomes strategic.
Completely strategic. It's treated as a temporary sprint towards a goal. Kristen, another worker interviewed, put it really clearly. She said workers are very focused on, this is my goal, this is what I'm getting my money for, and then I'm out of here.
And the goals are concrete things, not vague dreams.
Exactly. Tangible stuff. A deposit for a house, paying off a car, funding education, even just saving up for Christmas presents for their kids.
It's not about waiting to be rescued. It's about hitting a number on a spreadsheet.
Pretty much. It forces a kind of financial precision. You have to figure out, okay, how many bookings or scenes do I need to hit this specific target? Then you decide the strategy. Is this a side hustle I do for a couple of years? Or do I go all in, full time for 6 months and get it done fast?
That calculation. It's almost the ultimate expression of agency within really tight constraints, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maximize the income, minimize the time exposed to risk.
Exactly. It's a very calculated risk management strategy, fundamentally.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit from the kind of cold logic of the economics.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the human side, the emotional element. Because often what's really being bought and sold isn't just sex, it's companionship, emotional labor.
That emotional labor is so critical and so often overlooked or dismissed. It's the performance of connection. Listening, showing warmth, creating a sense of intimacy, even if it's temporary and transactional. That anecdote you mentioned, the client paying for an hour, sex for 5 minutes, then talking about art history for the rest.
Yeah, that one really stuck with me. The worker realized he just paid for the company of human being.
Right. And that act, which involves a kind of vulnerability from the client admitting that need, paying for it, is immediately met with this wall of public stigma directed at the worker providing it.
Such a disconnect. And the language used to enforce that stigma is often brutal, dehumanizing.
Definitely. Like in Laos, the workers talked about how damaging it was to be called Kaylee, which is apparently a really harsh word, like bitch. But calling themselves bar woman felt more neutral, more professional. It created a psychological boundary against the abuse.
That small shift in language makes such a difference to their sense of self, sounds like.
It does. It shows how words are used to control and marginalize.
But okay, where you have that combination of demand, stigma, and often desperation, risk inevitably follows. We have to talk about the darker side, the violence. The research from Chicago on the men who bisected the Johns offered some really chilling insights there.
Yeah, the profile of the buyer is revealing. Often driven by a need for control and maybe avoidance. Average age of first purchase was only 21.
Wow, young.
And a big chunk, 36%, said they did it specifically to avoid emotional involvement or commitment.
So buying their way out of the complexity of a real relationship? Buying control, essentially.
That seems to be a major factor, efficiency and control. But then you also had 19% saying they were looking for companionship or even wanted to pretend they had a relationship for that short time.
That's complicated. Seeking intimacy but also avoiding it feels contradictory.
It is, and that contradiction perhaps fuels some of the psychological gymnastics you see around harm. Like 42% of the buyers admitted they knew prostitution causes psychological and physical damage to women. They knew it.
Yet, almost the same number, 39%, believe the myth that prostitution prevents rape. That awful old pressure valve idea.
Yeah, that justification allows them to continue despite knowing the harm, and that environment is incredibly dangerous for workers. The Chicago research found that basically violence wasn't just a risk, it was practically universal. 100% of the participants surveyed had experienced some form of violence.
100%. That's staggering. Not just threats, but actual physical violence.
Everything. Kicking, punching, threats with weapons, rape. It's described almost as an occupational hazard, not an exception.
God. And serious injuries, too.
80% reported serious injuries from clients or pimps that needed medical help. It's a workplace defined by constant threat.
So what actually stops these buyers?
Yeah.
If they know the harm and do it anyway?
Well, interestingly, the biggest deterrent wasn't necessarily jail time. It was social shame. public exposure.
Really? More than legal consequences?
Significantly more, it seems. 87% said having their name or photo published in a newspaper would strongly deter them. And 41% said just having to attend a mandatory John School class would be a deterrent.
So it's the fear of their reputation being ruined.
Hmm.
Their job, family, social standing.
Exactly. The public judgment, the hit to their image, that's the cost they seem to fear most.
Okay, we also have to address trafficking. Because that looms large over any discussion of sex work, and rightly so.
Yeah.
It complicates the whole idea of choice.
It absolutely does. And the UNODC findings are clear. Trafficking is global, it's organized crime, and it preys on extreme vulnerability. Think about displacement due to climate change. Think about crushing poverty, child labor situations. Traffickers exploit those weak points.
And the UNODC stresses protecting the victims, right?
Yeah.
Ending the blame.
Yes. The focus has to be on their safety and dignity. We need to be careful, though, to distinguish between trafficking, which is coercion and exploitation, and consensual sex work, which is what much of the other research discusses. It's crucial to keep those separate where possible while acknowledging the horrors of trafficking.
The lines can seem blurry sometimes, especially with those Nigerian examples.
Mm-hmm.
Family involvement. That's particularly tough to grapple with.
It's devastating. In some cases, families were genuinely tricked, thinking their child was going for a legitimate job or education. But in others, well, the report suggests some families knew it was likely prostitution under a madam, but didn't stop it. Maybe saw it as the only way out of desperate poverty.
That level of desperation, that complicity born of hopelessness, it's just awful.
It really is, and it underscores the immense psychological toll, which brings us back to mental health support.
Right. Which is often lacking, or worse, comes with judgment. Workers needing support, but facing therapists who just want to rescue them.
Yeah, that Psychology Today piece really nailed a key issue. Therapists need to approach this with non-judgmental, affirmative curiosity. It's not about assuming the work is the trauma, or that leaving is the only valid goal. It's about supporting the person where they are, helping them process their experiences and choices, empowering their agency.
That makes sense. Meeting them where they're at, respecting their reality.
And that extends to their personal lives, too. Helping workers and their partners navigate the jealousy, the trust issues, that's complex therapeutic work, using frameworks like consensual non-monogamy, maybe, to set boundaries and expectations. It requires therapists to be really adaptable and non-judgmental about the work itself.
Okay, so let's pivot to policy then, because the legal framework clearly shapes everything: safety, stigma, economics. There are basically three main models, right?
Broadly speaking, yeah. You've got the Nordic model first, used in places like Sweden and Norway. That model criminalizes buying sex, targets the client, but decriminalizes the seller. The idea is to stamp out demand based on the view that all sex work is exploitation.
But what are the actual effects on the workers? Does it help them?
Well, critics argue it often makes things more dangerous. By targeting clients, the work gets pushed underground. Hidden locations, online arrangements. This makes it much harder for workers to screen clients, negotiate terms, or work together for safety.
And it probably increases stigma too, right? If you're operating in this legally gray, hidden way, you're less likely to report crimes or seek help.
Exactly. And workers can still face penalties like eviction or even losing custody of their kids just for being suspected of selling sex. So the law says it protects them, but the reality can be punishing.
Okay, so Model 2 is the opposite extreme: decriminalization.
Right, like New Zealand famously adopted. That removes criminal penalties for everyone involved: sellers, clients, even third parties like managers. It treats it essentially as labor.
And how did that change things on the ground, psychologically?
It was significant. Workers still faced discrimination from society, obviously, but how they felt the stigma changed. Instead of internalizing the shame, feeling like they were bad, they were better able to see it as external injustice. They felt anger at the discrimination rather than shame about themselves.
That's a huge psychological shift, moving from self-blame to righteous anger. That sounds protective.
Very protective for mental health, yeah. And this brings us to probably the most compelling data-driven piece we looked at: the Rhode Island experiment.
Right, this was the accidental decriminalization of indoor prostitution back in 2003.
Exactly. A court ruling suddenly made indoor work legal, creating this natural experiment. Researchers could then track the effects on public health and safety compared to other places.
And the findings were unexpected.
Pretty stunning, yeah. Okay, so indoor prostitution increased, as you'd expect. But here's the kicker. Between 2004 and 2009, Rhode Island saw a 31% decrease in reported forcible rape offenses across the whole population.
Wait, a decrease in rape? How does decriminalizing indoor sex work lead to less sexual violence overall?
Well, there are theories. One is simply that safer working conditions indoors meant sex workers themselves experienced less violence, bringing down the total numbers. Another, maybe more uncomfortable idea is that it might have shifted some aggressive or non-consensual demand away from the general public and into the transactional, now regulated indoor market.
Hmm, that's a challenging thought. But the implication is clear, potentially improved public safety.
And the public health benefits were just as stark.
Gonorrhea rates, right?
Yeah, a 39% drop in female gonorrhea incidents statewide during that period.
Wow.
The logic is if indoor work isn't criminalized, workers are more likely to get regular health screenings, report unsafe practices, and crucially, feel empowered to insist on safer sex, like condom use. That reduces transmission overall.
But even with rules, getting clients to actually use condoms is still a huge issue, isn't it? Constant negotiation.
Absolutely. Even in the adult film industry in LA, where condoms are mandated by law for certain acts, enforcement is tricky. In transactional sex work globally, it's even harder. Clients often offer more money to skip the condom. We saw that in Laos, workers pressured to forego condoms for triple the pay sometimes,
That's an impossible position, weighing immediate financial need against long-term health risk.
especially when you're desperate. And then there's the third model, legalization, like in Germany or the Netherlands. That sounds good making it legal, but it has its own problems.
Like the licensing and registration requirements.
Exactly. It sounds like it adds legitimacy and protection, but who does it exclude? Often the most vulnerable. Undocumented migrants, for instance, can't register without risking deportation.
So the system meant to protect ends up criminalizing those who need protection most, pushing them back underground.
Precisely. It can create this two-tiered system. Regulated, visible workers, and then a hidden, more vulnerable group who prioritize anonymity over official status. It becomes about surveillance as much as safety.
Okay, one last area we need to touch on is harm reduction in specific communities, particularly around chemsex.
Right. Chemsex, sexualized drug use, often discussed in the context of men who have sex with men, MSM. It's often linked to the broader hookup culture, dating apps, and intense pressures around looking good, performing sexually, being desirable.
And the drugs are used to manage those pressures.
Often, yeah. Drugs like meth might be used to lower inhibitions, push sexual boundaries, sustain activity, kind of let go. Sometimes there are medical reasons too, overcoming performance anxiety or side effects from HIV meds that affect libido. It's complex.
So addressing it requires more than just saying stop using drugs.
Definitely. It needs integrated services, harm reduction advice, sexual health testing and treatment, and mental health support, all available together non-judgmentally. Recognizing that these issues are tangled up culturally and medically, clinics like the Lighthouse one mentioned, they train staff specifically on the needs of the chemsex community to avoid bias. It's about meeting people where they are.
So after going through all of this, the economics, the stigma, the violence, the policies, what's the main takeaway for me? It feels like this incredible balancing act workers have to perform. This calculated professional necessity on one hand, and this chaotic, dangerous, emotionally fraught reality on the other.
It really is a dual existence, and it's lived under the shadow of this intense societal judgment that limits their options for safety and justice. The system often seems designed to exploit that vulnerability, yet individuals show incredible resilience and agency just to navigate it.
Yeah, that resilience is striking.
And if you look at it through that Foucault lens, thinking about governance, regulating sex is often less about actual safety and more about controlling morality, controlling populations, defining who's acceptable and who isn't. The fight for sex workers' rights is really a fight for legitimacy, isn't it? To be seen as workers with rights, not just as social problems or moral failings.
So for you listening, trying to make sense of all this, what's the final thought? Where do we land?
Well, maybe the most provocative question comes back to that Rhode Island data. If decriminalizing indoor sex work demonstrably reduced population-wide rape and STI rates, does a legal approach focused on measurable public health and safety outcomes, even if it makes us morally uncomfortable, does that serve society better than a system based purely on moral condemnation? That's the tension, I think. That's the line between pragmatic policy and moral belief that you, the listener, have to grapple with.